Crystal Garland, good friend of the podcast, listens all the time. I had a conversation with her about this, and she brought something up to me that I was like, oh man, like I see this, and I thought it was an extremely fair critique of the situation. And I don't want to say that she was necessarily being critical, but I think she was looking at something and being like, yo, I can see why people will criticize Jay in this way. And her point was that her concern was that the wool in this situation pulled over Jay's eyes in the fact that he doesn't realize that he's getting played, and to use your word, being used as a shield and cover for the NFL.
Yeah, maybe.
Now, I think that's...
But to be fair, we don't know the particulars of that deal. I mean, like, we've seen reports that he's going to control halftime and all those kind of things. We don't know.
Now, here's the thing.
Yeah.
And this is where she expounded upon it, and I felt was fair. She looked back and said, this is a guy, talking about Jay, who had a deal, 1% ownership in the Nets. And if you really look back at that deal, and I agree with her on this, the deal was kind of covered for the Nets, not the Nets really, but the Forrest Ratner group, I should say, not the Brooklyn Nets, in the development that was supposed to be done, for people who don't know, around the Atlantic Yards. That's around the Barclays Center in Brooklyn. Now, I'm speaking on this as somebody who actually covered this, okay, and actually went and talked to people, Councilwoman Letitia James here in New York, former borough president Marty Markowitz. I did interviews for a paper on this story back in 2006, I believe. This was before this was coming here. There was a lot of concern from people in the Fort Greene, Prospect Heights, certain parts of Park Slope community as to how the development around the Barclays Center would be. They were promised a lot of housing. It was promised, as usual, when stadiums come in, jobs for people.
There's a running joke on Twitter that says that Jay-Z sort of helped spark gentrification in that area.
Yo, but it's a fair criticism and point, right? Yeah. And the thing is, in that area,
although it did start before that, but I mean,
yeah, but that was one of the big booms of stuff coming to the area. And now, if you look at some of the buildings, the high rises around Barclays Center that came, you don't see people that look like you or I in it. And Jay being a part of it, and him being this iconic rapper from Brooklyn, and leading this whole he was there for the groundbreaking and everything that went on with Barclays coming up and everything around it. It was a nice way for that group to put a black face in front of there and say, yo, this guy from Brooklyn is on board with this too. And I'm relaying this stuff as it was relayed to me by my homegirl who said this. And she brought up this point, and I was like, yo, that's fair. Like,
because look, history could repeat itself.
Yes, and I think, and that's why I say I don't think she necessarily was attacking Jay, but her point was.
But it's a fair observation.
It was a fair observation that is rooted in history, and I think she was like, "Hey, this is my concern. Could this be happening again?" He kind of got used in the situation. If you look back at historically, I'm not saying that there was nothing good. He helped the branding of the Brooklyn Nets. You remember the Hello Brooklyn T-shirts? He opened up the arena,
made them black and white, so then it could be universally, a thing.
He opened up the arena. He had 7 shows open up the arena. I was at the second show.
Yeah,
I understand all this, but looking back on it historically, he was a face that made it seem to the black and brown folks in Brooklyn, in New York, they're like, yo, it's okay. Jay-Z's on board. There's going to be opportunities for us. If you look at the housing that went up, again, I will say this again.
Yeah.
And for people who are not from Brooklyn, listen to this podcast. The homes and stuff that were promised there weren't delivered on time. 2, they have not placed people that look like myself or Brian in those places. And if you try to get in those places, if you are, how do I say this? And I know I'm speaking from experience too, because I tried to get a lottery to get into one of those condos and homes in there. And I didn't win the lottery, and that's fine. But
you live in a nice spot now.
And it's not people that don't look like us. And when you look at what's happening in Fort Greene and Prospect Heights, these neighborhoods of Brooklyn, that sparked gentrification was a whole nother thing. And I think it's a fair concern if you were looking at Jay and saying, hey, man, you kind of been used by older white men with power and money before.
Is this
happening again?
Let me add to that. It was like seeing the quotes were one thing. But then when you look at the video, him, Roger Goodell next to each other, and this is where I understand Eric Reid's frustration. When you sort of see it, it's worse than it actually reads. Like, it sounds worse. And then when you see it and, they're kind of laughing up there and he's saying we're past kneeling. And I get why Eric Reid had an issue with that as well.
No, I understand that.
Because he was saying that you never knelt in the first place.
Yeah.
So how could you say, how could you just come up here, from the outside, so to speak, not being in the trenches and be like, oh, we're past kneeling? Like, who are you to say that?
There was no proper answering of the questions. There was no plan. That's my issue with this that I'll say on terms of if I'm going to be critical of Jay-Z. I agree with my homegirl's point, but I also feel like this was my problem. If you're going to put your name and say that you're going to help with the Inspire Change Initiative, you got to let me know how.
Yeah.
And there weren't enough reporters there pressing that, number one, but that's a whole nother problem.
Because
there was,
as you pointed out, do they really care about that stuff?
They didn't want the real reporters in there doing that. I think you have to actually say what the plan is here. There was no plan. There was nothing said. Jay, if this is how all of this goes away, if Jay in that press conference had said, yo, this is what we're going to do. We're going to give money to the Black Lives Matter. We're going to get involved with these grassroots companies. We're going to do this. We're going to support players having their protests for social injustice. He literally could have outlined a plan. Mm-hmm. If he had just said those things, yo, we probably not even talking about this on this podcast. But the problem
and maybe Eric Reed is not as upset.
Yes.
Because I think he wants answers just like everyone else does.
But that's a fair criticism too.
Yeah.
Jay and the NFL, I'm going to put both of them, didn't outline any plan at all. Now, does that make Jay a sellout? No. There's been these reports and rumors that Jay could become an owner or part owner, et cetera, and that's great, right? If that happens, that would actually be huge. So let's not act like that wouldn't be a huge thing.
Yeah.
If that ends up happening. Maybe he can't speak on that right now. I don't know. But to sit up in a press conference as both people and not have a plan, that's a bad job. And that's whoever's the publicist behind this or whatever, how you guys weren't ready for those questions or to answer that, that's awful.